अब वो मॉस्क तोड़ के उसको टेम्पल को रीबिल्ड करोगे, कितने रीबिल्ड करोगे?
जितने हो सके.
It could be Hindus who don't want any more bloodshed.
Why do they expect bloodshed? Who are they expecting it from? Why don't they answer that question?
Because when somebody makes a claim कि इसको तोड़ो फिर से
तो
बनाओ.
अब जवाब दो भाई कोर्ट में. हमें मतलब you prove us wrong in court. Evidence for evidence. Evidence के जवाब में तलवार क्यों उठ रहा है भाई यहाँ पे?
But what if the Muslim community turns around and say कि तुमने यहाँ पे रेल भवन बनाया, रेल भवन के नीचे हमारा मदरसा हुआ करता था. ये
ठीक है, उसके नीचे क्या हुआ करता था ये भी देख लेते हैं.
What is happening with regard to Sambhal, Places of Worship Act, Waqf, sense of anxiety that are we heading into a period of social unrest?
If a lawful legal proceeding and action is brought to a grinding halt under the fear of stone pelting, what does it say about your aspirations of becoming a Vishwaguru? I don't understand the constant chest thumping about Hindutva and Bharat without having the courage to actually reclaim the spirit of Bharat.
Aren't the mosques also spirit of Bharat?
I agree, but as long as they are not on occupied sites.
Talapati Vijay, how do you see his rise?
After Kamal Hassan's failure, he may have been somebody's plan B.
Asaduddin Owaisi, his politics.
He knows how to present his position which is favourable to his community within the four corners of the constitution. That is always a tough game to play, and he does it reasonably well.
Namaste, Jai Hind. You're watching or listening to another edition of the ANI podcast with Smita Prakash. In the studio with me today is J. Sai Deepak, who's appeared twice on the podcast before. But today the conversation will mainly centre around the Supreme Court order on the Places of Worship Act 1991. The Supreme Court has recently barred civil courts across the country from registering fresh suits challenging the ownership and title of any place of worship, and from ordering surveys of disputed religious places until further orders. Now, junior courts cannot order a survey or seek a report from the Archaeological Survey of India, as have been done in several recent instances. In May 2022, after the Babri Mosque Ram Janmabhoomi case reached the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud, orally observed that a survey may not necessarily fall foul of the Places of Worship Act. And then, between 2022 and 2024, at least 6 suits were filed claiming past existence of a Hindu temple at the site of a mosque or dargah. Surveys were ordered in 3 of these cases. With the latest Supreme Court ruling, let's get a clearer picture of what is the way forward for those fighting for pre-existing temples. Over to J. Sai Deepak. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
We've had you before on the show.
Twice.
Right. So I think one was on your book.
Yes, ma'am.
When it had come, and the second one was probably
Sanatana Dharma statement of Udayanidhi.
Sanatana Dharma,
September.
and also I think elections coming up and that happening. So this time I thought of you, and I wanted to talk about the constitutional debate that was happening in Parliament. So much happening and things. I wanted to talk about that because that is also your forte. But what is disturbing a lot of people, especially youngsters, is about what is happening with regard to Sambhal, Places of Worship Act, Waqf, all this coming up, and a sense of anxiety that are we heading into a period of social unrest?
I think your audience deserves honesty. Therefore, let me, for the benefit of their consumption, disclose the fact that I represent the Kashi royal family in the proceedings there. So obviously, I've chosen a side. And considering the fact that the matter is sub judice, I'll keep my comments tempered on the subject. But nevertheless, what already exists in public domain through my articles and speeches, I think I can speak on that. So the optics of it, or the social unrest part of it, if a court order of a survey incites violence or results in unprovoked violence, or the court order itself is seen as a provocation, then there is a problem in the manner in which the Indian state's exclusive claim over the monopoly of violence or force has been challenged. You can't even enforce a court order. And 2, if a lawful legal proceeding and action is brought to a grinding halt under the fear of stone pelting, what does it say about your aspirations of becoming a Vishwaguru?
Okay.
What exactly are you projecting by way of strength? If you can't project strength internally, don't hope for others to take you seriously outside. 3, the action, in my limited submission, since the matter is sub judice, is perfectly legal. And I said as much in court. So, let's see how it plays out. I'll keep my powder dry for the court. Without getting into the legality of it, I believe it is legal. There are articles to this effect that I've written. But I think constitutional institutions owe their allegiance to the law, to the constitution, and they should simply ask themselves whether these proceedings must be held hostage under the shadow or threat of violence. I hope they won't be. And 2, what does it do to the rights of all those parties who have a right under the law to initiate these proceedings? That is the basic question. See, if social unrest becomes the barometer for any action, कोई भी किसी को पैसे देके 40-50 लोगों को इकट्ठा करेगा और पत्थर फेंकना शुरू करेगा. That immediately questions the law and the legal action. ऐसे थोड़ी होगा. That can't be the barometer or the yardstick for it. 3, I genuinely hope that this matter is heard quickly and it is decided regardless of reactions of any section of the public or community from whichever side. Decide it on merits. Deal with it on merits. Let's apply the black letter of the law along with its spirit and ask ourselves whether what has been happening in the context of Kashi and Mathura are truly unconstitutional or illegal or impermissible or so on and so forth. Let's test that.
But it's not just Kashi Mathura. Now there are so many. The lower courts admitted several.
So
it's going to be several of them, and now they can't.
Right.
Because there's a stay now.
That I agree. See, let's look at the biggest bogey that's constantly cited. Ek khula to kitne khulenge? You're opening the floodgates. Floodgates to what? Floodgates to what? Reclamation. And I don't understand the constant chest thumping about Hindutva and Bharat without having the courage to actually reclaim the spirit of Bharat. And I've said this before, that if the Supreme...
And the mosque also spirit of Bharat?
I agree. But as long as they are not on occupied sites.
That is where the dispute occurs.
That is where the dispute occurs. So what are we saying? See, the Supreme Court itself, through its verdict of the Ayodhya, in the Ayodhya case, on which I have certain disagreements, has shown the path. A party which has lost was given land by the Supreme Court when it doesn't deserve to be given land. You have enough property through Waqf property and you're anyway claiming more, the rest of Bharat also. You keep building there. It is possible to simply evolve a process of exchange, which, although is not necessary or required, you can do this in the interest of peace. But if you wish to retain an occupied site, knowing fully well that it has a seriously contentious history and history that goes against you, and you still hold on to it, how do you expect an awakened Bharat to respond to it when history is beginning to resurface? Pun intended.
How many places will you keep saying that this is occupied, that is occupied? How are you going to say it? Because what you said once is that there are 4,000 sites.
Actually, I said 40,000.
40,000.
And that figure could have been exaggerated. But what did I say? We spoke of one wasn't acceptable. We spoke of 3, it wasn't acceptable. I said, then if negotiation has no room here, then why will I limit the scope of my claim? Mangna hai to sara mang lo abhi. What is the point?
Ki kuch to milega.
Exactly. And not just that. Kuch to milega is a different issue. At the very least, the history of each of these places needs to come out. People should know Ram Janmabhoomi was not isolated. People should know Kashi was not isolated. And people should know this was not exactly a northern-centric phenomenon. Across the board.
Tipu.
100%. Tipu and so many places. I think in Warangal, so many temples. Shaktipeethas are there. Therefore,
Kashmir.
What exactly? And Kashmir is also in the 90s, for God's sakes. Not just, you're not talking about the medieval ages. So what these proceedings do is to give you an opportunity to present evidence, which unfortunately haven't found their way into textbooks. It will generate a discourse. Hopefully it should trigger introspection. I have a slightly mixed position on the question of jati, but nevertheless, if the history of so-called caste and its, let's say, related behavior have constantly found reference in our public discourse and, let's say, in our textbooks and every other place, and there are policies to that particular effect which are trying to redress a certain grievance, tell me, why does the logic of that position change in the context of religion? Answer the question. The position is repair. It's reparative justice. It's not retributive justice, right? It is to ameliorate certain social, let's say, social behavioral patterns. Now, how much of it is based on, let's say, actual history? That's a different question altogether. But nevertheless, the Indian state seems to have taken that position for granted. Why does it want to take a different position in the context of inter-community relations when it doesn't have a problem taking that position in intra-community relations? So, divide the Hindu and deprive the Hindu of his opportunity to reclaim his sites as well? That can't be the strategy. So you constantly talk about jati, caste, reservation, keep us divided. And when it comes to the other side, secularism will prevail. Ye thodi ho sakta hai. Therefore, my position is very clear. The Indian state by now should have constituted a commission for truth, reclamation and reconciliation, which it has not had the courage of its conviction to do in all these years, even now. Do it, set out a clear policy, ask yourself, here's the simple thing. Before the farm laws were asked to be stayed or not implemented by the Supreme Court, the question that was put to the government was, did you speak with these parties, the affected parties? Did you undertake a wide-ranging consultation? Now here's the question. Before the Places of Worship Act was brought into effect, I think in 1991, how many affected parties on both sides were consulted? Was a baseline study undertaken to find out how many such existing disputes are pending in courts, or there are existing claims even outside of courts? As long as you've not done that study, it's a knee-jerk reaction. Now let's go to the next step. Why does Ram Janmabhoomi deserve an exceptional treatment through non-application of the Places of Worship Act, which exemption is not available either to Kashi, Mathura or any other temple? Isn't that discrimination according to the constitution? So
what did the court say then? Why was it special? Why was it different?
The court did not say anything to that effect. So here's what happened. And just pardon me here, I'm going to get slightly academic here, but I think it's important. We are being told constantly in public discourses and other places that the Ayodhya verdict itself has taken a position on the Places of Worship Act. And therefore, the challenge to this act is meaningless because apparently that judgment has given a stamp of approval to the act and its constitutionality. Okay? We are being told you can't challenge this because the Constitution bench has already said this is a perfectly constitutional act. Point number one. The constitutionality of the Places of Worship Act was never an issue in the Ram Janmabhoomi case.
Yeah, why?
Because the act says, section 5 says that this dispute is outside the purview of the application of this act.
Yeah, because it was pre-1991.
Not just that. According to them, they have just said, that the reasons for it we don't know.
They said no, that it was already in court before the 1991.
Then what about, let's say, okay, the only fact of the matter is there was a pending litigation, so to speak, since 1858. But the fact of the matter is the provision says this is exempt, right? If the provision says that the act exempts its application to this dispute, that means there is no reason to discuss the act in the context of the dispute. So the law basically says, and this is from the Supreme Court, no finding of the court on an issue which is not an issue before it in a particular case is binding. मुद्दा आपके सामने खड़ा ही नहीं हुआ किसी, let's say, case में. Your observations in that regard are what we call obiter dicta, marginal observations, non-binding observations, no precedential value. Okay? So for whatever it's worth, those findings do not come in the way of a challenge because they are obiter dicta. Second, as far as the trigger for the discussion in the Ayodhya judgment itself, you'll be surprised at what has happened. 3 judges pass a verdict, a 2-1 verdict in Allahabad in favor of the temple side in the context of Ram Janmabhoomi. One of them, I think, is Justice Sharma. I think there are 2 Hindu judges. One is Justice Sharma, Justice Agarwal, and I think it's Justice Khan. So one of them so one of those judgments of the 3 judges becomes the trigger for the Supreme Court to take it up. Now, why does the Supreme Court take it up here? Supreme Court says, in the 3-judge verdict, the Places of Worship Act has been discussed by the lower court or by the Allahabad High Court. Therefore, we will have to decide or we'll have to adjudicate upon it. The single judge, or let's say the judge of the Allahabad High Court as part of the 3-judge bench, never discussed the Places of Worship Act at all. He was quoting a 95 judgment of the Supreme Court to say that it is possible to enforce rights under Article 25 through standard suits. And in that judgment, in the extracted portion, there was a reference to Places of Worship Act. That extraction is there in the Allahabad High Court judgment. The Supreme Court mistakes this extraction to be a finding of the judge of the Allahabad High Court, when in fact he was merely quoting it. There was no such issue for him to even decide on. And then for 10 pages, the Supreme Court discusses the Places of Worship Act, saying he has decided or he's returned a finding, so we too have to comment on this particular issue. It's actually based on a proper clerical error. Proper clerical. And I wrote an article to this effect in 2020, within 6 months of the judgment. And I wrote 2 pieces on my blog called Yukti, immediately after the judgment, saying there is a very glaring error here. There's no reason for this discussion to have taken place either legally or even factually. After I published this article in a particular portal, check out which portal this is, they asked me to stop writing. They asked me to stop writing. Until then, they were literally after me saying, "Ek column to likh do, hafte ke liye likh do." This is what they said. And after they said, "Thoda zyada ho gaya." I said, what was wrong in this? So therefore, there is no constitutional bar. There is no judgment that effectively shields this act from any challenge. But the best possible position I am taking, or even Vishnu is taking, and which is on record, is...
On the Kashi.
No, just on the act. Act ko rehne do. Usse kuch nahi hoga. Because the act speaks of the possibility of a survey to determine if a particular site is an archaeological site within the meaning of the Archaeological Act of 1958, which is it has to be 100 years or more. So the moment you establish within the meaning of that particular provision, section 4.3, that this is indeed a site which is more than 100 years, then the bar under the act stops applying. That means you can say that reclamation is possible once you establish it's beyond 100 years.
So you bring the ASI first.
Correct. That's what has happened here. ASI का सर्वे कराइए, find out कि ये 100 साल है या उससे पुराना है, इसके नीचे क्या था, सब निकालिए.
Is the ASI equipped to go to the 40,000 sites to go and see it?
Well, if this country is serious about it, then it can ramp up.
Okay, so I have a couple of them. The Sambhal Masjid in UP, where we saw violent protests.
Atala Jaunpur.
Then there's Gyanvapi Masjid in UP. There's Ajmer Sharif Dargah in Rajasthan. The Shahi Eidgah. Shamsi Jama Masjid. Tiliwali Masjid in UP. These are 3 in UP. Delhi's Quwwatul Islam Masjid. And then Kamal Maula Masjid in MP. Now these are some of the major mosques where Hindu community says that it was built over destroyed temples.
Madhya Pradesh has several such sites, including sites dedicated to Devi Saraswati.
So sites bole to temples which have been turned.
Yes.
So there are pillars or something where...
Clear inscriptions. I think there's a place called Dhar.
Yeah.
There are several such places.
So now these are the ones which are in court. Some of these are in court. Dhar maybe not in court.
It's not in court yet.
Yeah. So now the ones that I have listed out, these are in court.
Right.
What happens to these cases now? They just
As of now, until...
Tariq pe tariq pe tariq.
It's in principle, it's adjourned sine die. Because no effective orders can be passed.
So now unless in the Supreme Court somebody challenges it,
Correct.
the lower courts cannot pick it up.
Until I think a resolution of the Places of Worship Act challenge is decided one way or another, the stay seems like it might continue.
Okay. Will the two communities in the entire country, will they now sit silent after the Supreme Court verdict, or do you think that the Hindu community has been too charged now to let sleeping dogs lie? Maybe wrong metaphor I'm using.
I don't know what they will do. I can perhaps come...
Because there is no one organization picking it up. It's not as if the VHP, like they did with Babri Masjid and, so it's not one organization anywhere.
I'm happy with that.
You're happy with that?
Yes.
See,
the thing is, there are 2 sides to it. One, and somebody decides to be, let's say, a loose cannon. On that front, I have a problem with that person if they don't go properly prepared. It's a serious issue.
Because it sets a precedent.
Sets a precedent. Your dismissal or acceptance sets a precedent for the rest of us. So if you want to get into this battle, you want to join the fray, please come better prepared. anybody jumps into this because they also want to be heard, then the rest of us will pay the price. Now, a centralized command structure also would mean that if a decision is taken that isse zyada hum challenge nahi karenge, that curtails the rights of the community, and nobody can speak on behalf of everyone. Because you see, some of these temples could be kul devtas and kul devis of a particular community. आप होते कौन है उनका मुंह बंद करने वाले? They have their specific rights under Articles 25 and 26 to say, this is our Kul Devta Mandir. It is more important to us than certain other big temples. Can you stop us? Why? Because I have a rin or a duty or an obligation to this particular temple. And that's how this entire concept goes on. We have actually an umbilical cord, a hereditary relationship with this temple. And if that temple stands occupied, what are we supposed to do? How can you ask them to say, नहीं नहीं आप चुप बैठ जाओ, ये तीन मिल गए ना, आप चुप बैठ जाओ? ये नहीं हो सकता है. If you recognize Hindu diversity, then you have to recognize the diversity of temples and voices. Otherwise, it's just let's say, an ornamental phrase that you use in the interest of showing plurality within the Hindu community.
But there is a feeling that, this happened in the past. The desecration happened in the past. So shouldn't there be a time period that, okay, from 1800 onwards, from 1900 onwards?
Yes, we have the time period.
So
712 AD. Time period chahiye. Is this the first time I'm making this statement? No. Open my book, first book.
Yeah.
What would be the cutoff date to test what is decoloniality for Bharat? I specifically said it's not from the point when the Christian colonizer entered this country. I said it starts from the invasion of Sindh. I specifically said this. I knew this argument would come about, and therefore I gave the cutoff date in the book very clearly. It's not an afterthought. That we have suffered two different waves and two different, let's say, shades of colonization. And therefore, we have to apply different yardsticks and standards. If South America has determined for itself what shall be the cutoff date, that is from the entry of the conquistadors in Latin America, we have a different yardstick for Bharat. So that recognition already stands. You want a cutoff date, we'll give you a cutoff date. See, somebody contributes money, builds a particular structure, good, no problem. You broke something and you built something, then the communities have an existing right. Because Ram Janmabhoomi says, एक बार प्राण प्रतिष्ठा हो गया, एनर्जी वहां पे स्थापित हो चुका, उसका आवाहन हो चुका है, उसका कुछ नहीं किया जा सकता है until it has been deconsecrated. Desecration is not the same as deconsecration.
Explain.
Desecration is to khandify the murti.
Yeah.
Deconsecration is visarjan.
Oh, that so many temples have happened.
Exactly. Therefore, we are saying जब तक deconsecration नहीं हुआ है and पद्धति के हिसाब से वहां पे एनर्जी.
Is there a word for deconsecration?
That
or
is
have
visarjan.
You just created?
No, I am saying desecration is to break
Vandalize
and defile.
it, break.
Deconsecration is to undo the process.
Huh.
So when you do prana pratishtha, you're inviting the energy to reside at that place. You can also ask it to go back. And this happens in every puja. In every yagna, in every homa, the purpose of, let's say, the purohit, there are four corners of the yagnapit. And there are different names for it. Basically, what they do, the first process is sankalp karke avahan karna. But after the puja, thank you.
Yes.
That is the same thing that can happen with an image or a deity or let's say an idol, an icon, so to speak, a murti. That has not happened. That is the basis for reclamation of Ram Janmabhoomi saying, even after the construction of the disputed structure, Prana Pratishtha remains valid.
But then pujas never used to happen, no, after...
That doesn't matter. Puja ho ya na ho, ek bar Prana Pratishtha ho gaya, it continues. This is once a deity's place, always a deity's place until it has been sent back through Paddhati. It has not happened. So पहले वहाँ पे मंदिर था, प्राण प्रतिष्ठा वहाँ पे किया गया था, वहाँ पे मूर्ति की स्थापना हुई थी. That's the end of the matter. This is specifically the position recognized in Ram Janmabhoomi. Why does the logic of that position change with respect to the other places?
Because it was considered a one-off thing.
Exactly. Therefore, it is the number is the problem here. I'm saying number should be a problem. If Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb kicks in according to if it exists, exchange kar lo.
Nahi hoga na. How many will you do?
So that means that Tehzeeb doesn't exist. It's a myth. If it's a myth, okay.
No, Ganga Jamna Tehzeeb is coexistence.
Right.
It doesn't mean you give yours and I give mine.
So
and
truth, honesty and reclamation have no place in this concept.
I guess not.
So it's almost as good as the Pakistani position saying Kargil में जितना जगह हमने ले लिया वो हमारा हो गया. And coexistence उसके बाद चलता रहेगा. And they will move and the next wave will take more place. यही चलता रहेगा.
But ये हुआ ना, Aksai Chin went away,
That's because
POK went away.
So therefore, that is because the so-called Indian state has chosen never to respond. We are being told this is a new Bharat. If it's a new Bharat, will it not revisit these concepts? Okay, simpler question. ठीक है भाई, in the context of 1992, you said ये हुआ वो हुआ, ठीक है. अब तो लीगली हो रहा है. ASI के द्वारा सर्वे हो रहा है. Even that you have a problem with. A perfectly constitutional method through a court of law, through a court-appointed commissioner with experts, and through a specific provision that envisages, enables, and permits this kind of a survey, that too is unconstitutional. So what are you saying? Give up. So that these monuments that have been built to glorify particular invasion and domination continue. I don't care for the political aspect of it. I genuinely don't care for the political aspect of it or the cultural aspect of it. I am on fundamental questions of theology. Why should one person who has built a certain place with his asta give it up? On what anvils? And for who? What is this audience that we are expected to cater to?
Gave it up. No, give it up kahan pe? It happened.
Where kahan pe?
Hundreds of years ago, right?
Right. Okay. Gave it up in the sense, तलवार लेके आपके सामने कोई खड़ा हो गया.
हाँ.
Therefore, he is saying that maro ya bhago. And therefore, that translates to what? Relinquishment? No, it does not. It certainly does not. How many examples of other, let's say, sites do you want where there were continued waves of resistance, just as Ram Janmabhoomi? The problem with the understanding of the Ram Janmabhoomi case is that we think of it as an exceptional situation where that is perhaps the only site for which there was constant resistance and let's say defiance. No, that's not the case. Kashi bhi to kya hai? So who am I actually representing? I am representing the royal family which is reclaiming the Razia Mosque because that was the original place according to them. And who's Razia? The same Razia that Justice Nariman actually extolled in a speech saying Razia Sultana was a feminist ruler, Bharat has produced all of this. It's the same person. There are records to this effect. So I think instead of dropping, let's say, numbers as a bogey, let's speak facts and solutions. Solutions hain. And there's a clear methodology that the Supreme Court has shown through its Ayodhya judgment. You don't want even that. Then I think there's a serious problem where on the one hand, the Places of Worship Act will not allow us to reclaim. Then state control of Hindu temples will deprive us of autonomy. And the Waqf Act effectively enables expansionism. What are we exactly enabling as a constitutional
So these two
secularism?
can't coexist?
They, according to me, are three uncomfortable cohabitants. One cannot exist as long as the other does. And if all three exist, they come at the detriment and to the peril
Of society.
the civilization, Sanskriti, Bharatiya society.
Okay, now this, a noted historian, Richard Eaton, who's written several books, he says that it's not just these dozen odd mosques in UP and Madhya Pradesh and all. There are at least 80 instances. He says 80 instances of mosques in India where evidence of prior temple desecration is fairly certain.
Okay.
This is what he says. Now, there are many, there's a lot of literature available.
Correct.
And everybody will have a different number. And there's Sitaram Goel, this
Naranchori,
historian.
Hindu temples,
Yeah.
what happened to them, volume 1, 2.
So he says, correct.
They said 2,000 temples and that's the tip of the iceberg.
And 1,000 temples, I
2,000.
think. 2,000?
And all these temples, Atala,
2,000.
Jaunpur and everything, they have been specifically mentioned in the opening chapter by Arun Shori.
Okay, let's finish with Goel and then you tell me with Arun Shori. He says, Mahmud of Ghazni robbed and burnt down 1,000 temples at Mathura, 10,000 in and around Kannauj. One of his successors, Ibrahim, demolished 1,000 temples each in Hindustan, which is the Ganga, Yamuna, Doab and Malwa. Muhammad Ghori destroyed another 1,000 at Varanasi. Kutubuddin Aibak employed elephants for pulling down 1,000 temples in Delhi. Ali Adil Shah of Bijapur destroyed 200 to 300 temples in Karnataka. A Sufi Khayyam Shah destroyed 12 temples in Tiruchirappalli. Now, some of them, obviously, let's presume even 50% of them
It's true.
remained destroyed. The others couldn't be destroyed because they were it was made of stone.
Correct.
So they couldn't be destroyed. So uske upar mosque banaya.
Have you been to Jagannath Puri?
Yes.
Have you seen the broken idols?
Yes.
The marks of sword?
Yeah.
Even that was
I've
not
been
spared.
till Ayodhya to see in Thailand the destroyed temples. So, I mean, I've seen that was by a different thing. But what I'm trying to say is you have seen destroyed temples, you've seen Buddhist temples come up on them, you've seen, mosques come up on them. अब उसको क्या करोगे आप? उसको अब वो मॉस्क तोड़ के उसको टेम्पल को रीबिल्ड करोगे? कितने रीबिल्ड करोगे?
जितने हो सके. Okay, so let's flip the question and ask a slightly different question. What is the acceptable number for the other side?
I don't know. You tell me.
Zero.
None. Yeah.
0. Because when one was being contested, that was not acceptable. So we are being told 0 is the acceptable number.
Yeah.
So that means even Kashi and Mathura we give up.
But it's not 0 of just the other side. There is a whole bunch of people in this country.
He knows.
Millions.
Hindus in name only.
What?
Because they are being told. Because we are being told by these geniuses.
What? He knows.
He knows. Hindus in name only.
This is really unfair, you
Why?
know. It could be Hindus who don't want any more bloodshed. Hindus who don't want
But
any more...
why do they expect bloodshed? Who are they expecting it from? Why don't they answer that question?
Because when somebody makes a claim कि इसको तोड़ो फिर से
तो
बनाओ.
अब जवाब दो भाई कोर्ट में हमें मतलब you prove us wrong in court, evidence for evidence, evidence के जवाब में तलवार क्यों उठ रहा है भाई यहाँ पे? Prove us wrong, defeat us in court. Then the Hail Mary pass comes in. मतलब पूरा institution सारा मतलब this and that.
हाँ.
That is what we are being told.
So this
This is नाच न जाने आंगन टेढ़ा.
So you can't say that Dushyant Dave is Nach Na Jaane Aangan
I am
Teda,
not
such
taking any names.
Okay, I am taking no.
Then you take the responsibility.
I am taking name. He's saying that the judiciary in India, and I'm quoting. I'm not saying he. I am saying it. He's called it a majoritarian judiciary.
So
and he says,
when the electoral bond judgment was given, तब क्या हो रहा था?
Then
So many verdicts which have gone against the government. See, let's look at this. I don't hold brief for the government and nor do I wish to. The government will defend itself. My point is very simple. Community's interest, community's rights, can they be pegged within the four corners of the constitution? Period. And I am saying, prove the so-called majoritarian conspiracy and historical revisionism by coming to court. आपके जो विटनेसेस हैं इधर दे आर अनरिलायबल ड्यूरिंग राम जन्मभूमि, ये आधे तो भाग ही जाते हैं, पलायन करने में मतलब नंबर 1 है. आर्टिकल्स लिखना जानते हैं. And they know how to hold forth on, let's say, comfortable platforms before, let's say, sympathetic audiences. But when it comes to actually proving their point before a court of law on the anvils of evidence, even that you didn't have the, let's say, the ability to do.
Justice Nariman, he called it mockery of justice on what happened. Why didn't he come to court at that point of time? Why didn't he say anything? Why are these people saying it after Justice Chandrachud has demitted office?
See, I think it's very unfair when members of a particular institution basically say that this institution has gone downhill after my exit. That I think is too much of a statement to make. And two, some of his statements, both on history and especially contentious aspects of history and his specific, let's say, points on the Ram Janmabhoomi case are as inaccurate and incorrect as they can get. To say that there was no finding whatsoever from the Supreme Court on the existence of a temple underneath the disputed structure, call it only the disputed structure and nothing else, is false. It's provably, demonstrably and patently false. Read the judgment. Read the Allahabad High Court judgment. Read the addendum to the judgment of the Supreme Court, and you will see that there are instances where they say Guru Nanak visits the site once, मंदिर था. Guru Nanak बाद में आते हैं, मंदिर नहीं था. Okay, तो बीच में क्या आया? जलजला. हुआ क्या भाई वहां पे? And there are corroborating records. And you're telling me that a general pattern of behavior that has been witnessed across the subcontinent and across the world, you're telling me suddenly did not happen here. So we are not the playground for expansionist ideologies. We are only asking for what belongs to us through a court of law. What is unreasonable about this position? You can write articles, use your historians to, let's say, pixelate portions of this country's history, brainwash people, generations of people. And when called to court to say, इतना ही मतलब हमारा जो position इतना बेतुका है, तो आके prove तो कर दो भाई तुम court में. ना, that you will not do.
But in all these, now what he's saying is, Justice Nariman said that the court Supreme Court stopped short at identifying the mandir. Did it stop?
The Supreme Court stopped short of identifying who was responsible for destruction of the temple. It never stopped short of identifying the existence of a temple underneath the structure, because there's a very clear discussion of the pillars that were actually unearthed. Do you know the kind of resistance that was given before the Allahabad High Court when the High Court, I think in 89, I don't know exactly when, ordered excavation? ASI's excavation was being resisted by the other side, and there's a judgment exclusively on why that particular operation or that particular exercise needs to be undertaken. Why do you not want stuff to be unearthed? ऐसा क्या डर है भाई? आपके हिसाब से तो कुछ नहीं हुआ था. The Dhara of Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb was flowing everywhere.
कहाँ आप अनर्थ करोगे ना? लोगों के घर बन गए हैं अब. Everybody is now terrified that oh my God, they'll come any day to my house.
Allow me to say this.
हाँ.
काशी में करो, मथुरा में करो, शक्तिपीठ ज्योतिर्लिंग जो भी हैं एंड जो जिनका पुराणों में रेफरेंस है उसमें करो. We are not saying हर गली की मंदिर में करो. At least major sites, yeah.
Sambhal is now a major site.
It was a major site. Dhar is a major site. All those sites which find some scriptural reference through the Puranas and or through a Sthal Puran, at least uska to karo. Because they will have identified communities who have a direct relationship with that particular institution. We don't need to start with a number of 40,000. At the same time, we can't start with the ridiculous number of 0.
But what if the Muslim community turns around and say कि तुमने यहाँ पे रेल भवन बनाया, रेल भवन के नीचे हमारा मदरसा हुआ करता था.
ठीक है, उसके नीचे क्या हुआ करता था ये भी देख लेते हैं. That's the point about the Waqf claim. So here's the point. Your claims, they rest on the strength of your claims, not on evidence. And the owners, unfortunately, in that context, turns on the party which wants to resist that particular claim. You now prove why it doesn't belong to you. Whereas here, when we are willing to prove that it belongs to us, we are being stopped from actually doing that through a process of evidence in court. How does this work, yeah? So on the one hand, there's a legislation that gives you a free pass. And there's another hand, there's a legislation that prevents me from presenting evidence. Tell me, how does this fall within the four corners of acceptable constitutional morality?
Who's going to pick this up now? I mean, you said you don't want to get into the politics of it and you don't want to get into political parties. But like I said before, the VHP had picked up the case of the Babri Masjid. Who's going to pick it up if it's going to be random people fighting?
I genuinely can't
cases?
answer the question. I will do whatever I can in my limited capacity. Vishnu is doing a stellar, fantastic job. I'd like to use this platform to recognize the scintillating work that he's done in the
Vishnu
service
Jain.
of the civilization. Yes, Vishnu Shankar Jain and his father Sri Hari Shankar Jain. Brilliant work, must be recognized and must be supported by all those who want reclamation of the civilization. And I think we need more such people. I'll use this platform to also make a confession, because there's a lot of myth that goes around about me. I am not doing this full time. I do this less than 20% of my time, because my professional time is dedicated towards, let's say, my livelihood. Vishnu has been doing this almost full time. So I'm using this opportunity to clarify a few things, to show that he has actually done more on this particular front. I can say I've written a book, I've done all of this. He has done a few things. I have taken up specific issues. I will target only those issues where I think I can lend a certain degree of, let's say, representation, and which I think I can accommodate and which can coexist alongside my professional commitments.
So we spoke about Sanatana in the last podcast that I recorded with you. You watch the incidents which are happening in Bangladesh, the targeting of the Hindu community and the Buddhists too, the vandalizing of temples, and I don't want to go into the details, but you're watching all this. There's one section which feels that it's upon the Hindu community in India to stand by them, to do something. But what can you do actually? You can't do anything. You can raise their voice in the sense in the international community, you can pick it up. So that like in 1971 when the world didn't care at all, nobody bothered about the Hindu community being killed, raped, their temples being destroyed. At least now the world knows something is happening. That's the only thing we can do. What else can we do?
We thought once the world is apprised of the situation, it will result in action. We stand proven wrong. So it's not about knowledge. It's about the aesthetics of the victim. Hindus don't make for great aesthetic victims.
Aesthetic victims?
Yes, it's not a politically correct cause to support. So you will find Richard Gere supporting Tibetans. How many such people in Hollywood will support the cause of Hindus who are actually being butchered right now?
Not even Hindus.
Exactly.
I haven't heard Sundar Pichai or any of them speaking.
There is a concept of aesthetics of victimhood. Palestinians make for great victims for some sections of the people. We don't. My suggestion is this. You started off by saying, what can Hindus do? Let's turn the question around through a different tone. What can we do? What we lack is non-state international Hindu organizations with the necessary networks and the pull and the pockets to get the job done in the event state actors fail. Or they are, let's say, they're crippled by certain circumstances or considerations. The state of Israel was created through such non-state actors and organizations. They created a state. And they were never more than Hindus in terms of numbers and demographics. Never. By the most conservative estimates, we are anywhere between 800 million to 1 billion across the world. By the most liberal estimates, they are not more than 1.5, let's say they're about 15 million at best. That's 1.5 crores. What is that population compared to Bharat? They get the job done for their community. They resist, notwithstanding the propaganda and the vitriol that's spewed against them from the 7th of October 2023. They've been doing it. Why can't we? Because this community needs to realize the value of non-state self-reliance, because assuming that there is a change of situation, your priorities still exist, your survival issues still exist, the existential challenges that stare at you still exist. You still need to have a response mechanism. I've said this before, that perhaps what you need is a hard-nosed World Hindu Congress of organizations and, let's say, individuals who can congregate at a certain place, discuss deliverables, and act on those deliverables as opposed to constantly becoming event organizing platforms. Let's assume that I get called or somebody gets called, we'll get more visibility, यहाँ पे 2-3 pictures हो जाएंगे, then Insta पे थोड़े likes हो जाएंगे, ये सब होगा, मेरी book की और बिक्री बढ़ी, ये सब चलता रहेगा. Has it had a tangible impact on minds? Yes, to some extent. I will not say no to it, I will not underplay it. But is it helping a person who's being butchered? At the end of the day, वही तो test है, वही तो metric है. The sheer futility and uselessness of what I have done became stark when I got messages from the relatives of people suffering there and the people themselves on a repeated basis daily throughout this entire period. Saying, kuch kijiye, kahin to kuch bataiye. For some reason, they labor under the delusion that I have access to higher powers and higher wisdom. I said, mujhe nahi pata. I have no access to anyone. All I can do is air this concern through my platforms. If it gets heard, sure. But ऐसा नहीं है कि मेरे बताए बगैर उनको पता नहीं है. They have access to better sources.
Yes.
तो उसके बावजूद क्या हो रहा है? I can only say, Bharat needs to truly secure this neighborhood and ensure that this neighborhood becomes a safe one for its core identity, which is Sanatana Dharma. You don't need to beat around the bush by calling it civilizational identity. और क्या है? Sanatana Dharma, यही है. China has operated with that particular vision in mind, where the core Chinese heartland or mainland has been protected through creation of multiple buffer regions through annexation. That's what they've done over the years. Outer Mongolia, Inner Mongolia, this and that, and Tibetan Plateau. And China was never meant to be our neighbor. Tibet was meant to be our neighbor, and Tibet and China were constantly fighting. We were having wars with Tibet. Zorawar Singh actually claimed Ladakh. So considering that is how a civilizational state operates. We may disagree with the Chinese style of working. Maybe it doesn't work for us. Democracy works for us better. But you have to ask yourself, what is your priority? Long-term security. Long-term civilizational security. It is not an abstract concept which is the pet peeve of the wine-tasting elites of Latvians. It has a real consequence, because when demographics change, you lose territory, cession of culture, then you realize they're outside your gated communities.
So people in the gated community say, हमने थोड़ी ना ठेका ले रखा है. If Hindus get attacked in Canada, if Hindus get attacked in San Francisco, if Hindu children are under threat in universities, in Ivy League colleges, if Hindus of Bangladesh, हमने कौन सा ठेका ले रखा है of looking after their welfare?
And which is why I use the word heroes at the outset. कम्युनिटी आइडेंटिटी और कम्युनिटी का वैल्यू आपको तब तक नहीं पता चलेगा जब तक ये प्रॉब्लम जो है आपके घर के बाहर खड़ा नहीं हो जाता है. तब समझ में आएगा. ये जितने भी आपके भाड़े के सिक्योरिटी गार्ड से भाग जाएंगे. Secular state will have its secular considerations when it comes to protection of Hindus. And usually it's not in our favor. Then you'll realize, अच्छा तो हमारे लिए खड़ा होने वाला बचाने वाला तो कोई यहाँ पे रहा
Why
ही
are you
नहीं.
saying secular, it's not in our favor? Why?
Because by and large, if the perpetrator happens to be a non-Hindu, there are considerations that go into the decision-making process, even if it is restoration of law and order. If the perpetrator happens to be a Hindu or an alleged Hindu, they suddenly find their masculinity. Yes. How many instances of this do you want across the history of independent India, not Bharat? So, those who think like that, Mubarak ho bhai. Your myopia will come back to haunt you at some point.
It hasn't.
Well, if it hasn't, I might as well bat for those who realize the value of it. I don't bat for those who don't understand the value of it. I don't claim to be the sole voice or whatever it is. But if at all there is a cross section of the community which deserves compassion, help, it is this segment.
The expats who, the first generation, second generation now out there, they say that the umbilical link is broken because what happens is that now they are facing the backlash because
Right.
they're doing very well, right?
Right.
Now they're facing the backlash and they're saying that now we are viewed with the same level when we try to form a unified grouping. The caste factor, the race factor, all that comes in. Hindu या Sikh है कि क्या है, Indian caste में देखा जाता है. So you have the Andhra grouping, then you have a Telangana grouping,
Agreed.
then you have in that the caste grouping, the OBC grouping, and now the Americans are waking up to the whole caste factor in this.
So, when I spoke of decoloniality, there were a bunch of geniuses on social media who said, यार कितना मतलब academic concept है. And I said, भैया जब तक तुम decoloniality की बात नहीं करोगे या mental decolonization की बात नहीं करोगे, जितने भी स्टीरियोटाइप्स भारतीय आइडेंटिटी और हिंदू आइडेंटिटी के खिलाफ इस कॉलोनियल लेबोरेटरी में इन लोगों ने इसका इजाद किया, उसका इस्तेमाल हर जगह पे होगा. एंड नाउ वी आर सीइंग इट. The discussion of an alleged breast tax, this tax, and Molakaram and all that, they talk about it. So history is being weaponized against your present and your future. So the job, it's at 3 levels. Address that historical, let's say, brainwashing or pixelation or the way they've fabricated it. Address that at one level. Then you need to have a societal, let's say, outreach as well, where each of these groups realize, अकेले तो हमें से कोई अकेला खड़ा नहीं हो पाएगा. We won't survive. You have to realize that. Learn to work with each other, collaborate with each other, put your individual egos aside. 3, there needs to be a political response, which means you need to start cultivating people in your respective jurisdictions who can bat for you. America passes off corruption as lobbying, karo. No problem. Wherever you have to wet the beak or dip the beak or whatever is karte baitho, but make sure that the job is done. Then you also make sure that the mothership is constantly there to help you. So it's a two-way street, which means India will need to actively invest in the diaspora, be unabashed about its civilizational identity. You don't need to discriminate against, let's say, minorities. But you need to be clear about, bhai, ye hai to Bharat hai, varna Bharat nahi hai, baat khatam. What is that identity whose absence will take away the identity of Bharat is the simple question. Whatever that identity may be.
Repeat?
What is that identity whose absence will finish the existence of Bharat as Bharat? If the answer is not obvious there, then I think we are deluding ourselves into secular stupidity.
This is a section which was not there earlier. It has just come, we've just introduced it recently. So I want your snap reaction. Doesn't have to be single line statements. Asaduddin Owaisi, his politics, his championing the cause of fighting the UCC and the others. What do you have to say to this?
Brilliant strategist, knows what his end goals are, committed to his vision, and has only evolved with time, knows how to address his home audience and knows what works with them, and knows how to obfuscate that very same message before the national media.
Yeah.
And I know of enough people who have fallen victim to that strategy, who don't understand what the jalsas and the takreers are about when they go to Aurangabad or let's say old parts of Bhagyanagar, not Hyderabad. Therefore, according to me, there is a lot for the Hindu community to learn from, to produce people with similar commitment, with similar vision, with similar, let's say, ability to message unabashedly, notwithstanding the resistance or, let's say, the audience reaction. Even in front of hostile audiences, I have seen him hold his own. Whether he's right or wrong or embarrassed, that's a different issue altogether. But he will not run away from a particular platform. I've seen that.
Electorally, beyond Hyderabad, he doesn't have that kind of an impact, in the sense that, yeah, he can cut votes and he can do that. But somehow his party gets battered at the hustings.
He's playing the long game. He's playing the long game.
But he's been around for 2 decades or more.
You have to realize that for a party which was limited to a few constituencies and portions of Hyderabad, for it to now have some kind of a national recall value where other parties fear their ability to undermine their votes or eat into their vote share is not a small journey. And this is not exactly, let's say, a BJP with a strong cadre-based support with a vast network, so on and so forth. They have taken their own sweet time. You have to give this person time as well. And according to me, I've said this before, that he knows how to present his position, which is favorable to his community within the four corners of the constitution. That is always a tough game to play, and he does it reasonably well.
Reasonably well, agree. On D.Y. Chandrachud.
I think as a practicing lawyer, I can say that the institution benefited from his Chief Justiceship and his stint, because it made possible for a lot of young practitioners to argue before the highest forum. He brought patience to that particular forum, which is otherwise extremely, it's short of time, and it's an extremely sensitive forum. So to that particular office, I think he certainly brought his brand of patience and indulgence. And
digitization, putting it on camera, court proceedings.
According to me, live streaming has two different consequences. I'm still not sure whether it's for the good or the bad. I still don't know, because where does advocacy stop and where does performance begin? You don't know.
Okay? But that's with the case with even when there was no live streaming.
No, I agree. But now the scale of the audience has gone up.
Yeah.
And maybe one of course, the optimistic way of looking at it is that sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Yes.
So therefore, obviously, they know that people are watching.
Yeah.
Any comments which are made off the cuff will also have some social media, let's say, repercussions, whatnot, assuming that they care about it.
Even judges.
Correct, even judges. And 3, I do believe that I have several disagreements on several judgments, but I think that's professional. But the systematic way of authoring a judgment, where you know the flow of it, where you know where this is coming from, those are certain aspects which as a practitioner I can appreciate. It's a more systematic way of reading it. It's not all over the place.
He was the darling of the wokes when he came in. And then come Ayodhya judgment. Everything changed, right?
But how do you know that he was the one to author the Ayodhya judgment? There is no
nobody
mention.
knows. Nobody signed it, right? So nobody knows.
So
but he somehow is the fall guy of that judgment.
No, I think, I don't know whether he authored it or not. All I can say is, as an institution, frankly speaking, 2 things have happened. He to his credit, let's say the reputation of someone who has made the maximum number of senior advocates from young counsels and women counsels also, so that there is more diversity of representation in the court. If you don't have representation, or let's say diversity of representation in the bar, you cannot have diversity of representation on the bench. That's the first step. So a message has been sent. Every decision taken from that particular office...
Diversity is only in gender or everything else? That
No. I'm saying in general diversity. Okay. And fortunately, I don't think anybody can accuse our judicial institutions of having other kinds of preferences in terms of, let's say, identity-based preferences. By and large, it's not been the case. At least I will limit that observation to Delhi. I don't think Delhi suffers from it.
Okay. But Supreme Court?
That includes the High Court and the Supreme Court.
And the Supreme Court. Okay. All right. Annamalai, we are going to come to Tamil Nadu politics, but before that, why did he go off in between to Oxford and now he's back?
I think that was a much needed break. Yeah? It was a much needed break. It was a particularly toxic election. And you must realize the kind of language that was used in Tamil Nadu for him to run him down. He is almost my age. he and I think, are almost of the same age.
You get mistaken for him also sometimes. I've seen people put your mugshot instead of his at times.
I don't think so. I think he's handsomer. At least he's handsome. I'm not. Two, I do
But
believe.
both of you talk in a similar manner. At least my mother says that.
Really?
You know, she says Sai also speaks very
Maybe
fast and
right. So that's the
and-
Tamil speed actually visiting English and the gesticulation and everything. I think it was a much deserved break because the way they targeted him and they pounced on him, for him to have revived the morale of the BJP in a difficult state such as Tamil Nadu, which has been traditionally pitted against it for all sorts of stereotypes, and he has certainly increased the vote share, notwithstanding the losses that they may have suffered. I do believe that as in terms of introspection, I think the entire mechanism and infrastructure there needs to be looked into.
should have been done before, no?
I agree. I certainly agree. I don't want to kick, let's say, people who bat for the civilization when they're down. I don't want to do that. I certainly believe that his heart is in the right place. And we need thinking people in politics. According to me, he is a stellar example of it. His qualifications speak volumes, which you know.
Correct.
And two, he is humble in public.
Yes.
And in private, it's not a show.
But some say that the miscalculation that he did was that not go into an alliance with AIADMK, and that is where the BJP lost at least 15 seats.
Ma'am, if the results had been otherwise, they'd have said this was a fantastic calculated gamble.
That's true.
Right? So it ultimately, the result will determine people's opinions on the decisions taken.
He
before
had
that.
both Amit Shah and Modi had backed him,
Okay.
and they were, at least during the elections, that's what one saw, that
Right.
it was Annamalai's advice and they gambled on that. And
It's okay. I think it's a lesson learned, or maybe at least this will perhaps help them understand if there are any fundamental weaknesses in the party structure in that particular state. What is it that they can do better? Could they have managed the electoral preparation better from their end in terms of, let's say, checking the booths and booth management and so on and so forth? All that is for them to do. I am not an expert on the subject.
This humility that you talked about, he has a massive following, right?
Right.
During his padayatras,
Yeah.
during everything, that massive crowds come in and they're weeping
Right.
when they come to him, and it's not fake. I've seen
Right.
that myself.
Right.
How do politicians keep that humility? And there's something to, I think, Tamil Nadu politics also. The crowds and the idolization. It's very much intrinsic to Tamil Nadu
you can
politics.
transport it back to the MGR era.
MGR era.
Right.
Subsequently,
Right.
So how do you think he keeps his
Roots and family and his fundamental grounding in dharma. He knows that when, let's say, a Peethadipati or a guru is sitting on a particular asan, you will sit at his feet. You will not occupy the same position. These are basic aspects of sanskar, which I think have to be observed. People may disagree, I don't care. But I think this is basic etiquette, at least for Sanatana Dharma. He follows that. And I think, notwithstanding the fact that he may have come from a bureaucratic background, there is an openness in the ear to other points of view, to genuine feedback. So far, I believe that these values have made sure that those who want to, let's say, give feedback still have the ability to do so. Now, the future will decide where he goes. But if, assuming that these values hold good and all things being equal, this one electoral setback, I won't call it a failure or a defeat, is no proof of what he can do. One summer doesn't make a swallow, or rather one swallow doesn't make a summer.
Okay. Prime Minister Modi, since we last spoke, the BJP has come back under Narendra Modi for the third term, but it's come back with a lesser majority.
Majority.
Yes.
Yes.
Right? And for the first couple of months, it seemed as if the BJP was too shell-shocked in the parliament. If you noticed, there was that aggression was completely missing, which one saw in parliament earlier. They looked like a party which is lost, and the Congress looked like a party which is won. But Maharashtra elections and Haryana elections seems to have changed. You saw the constitutional debate. What did you think at that time, where Mr. Modi's speech and Amit Shah's speech?
I'm just thinking whether I should comment on the subject or not. Okay, I'll just...
You've written 2 books on it.
I have, but not on politics or electoral politics. It's not my forte. But I'll just offer some limited observations. People can reject it if they want. One, I think whatever you may say, for the opposition and the main party of the opposition to have doubled or almost doubled its, let's say, presence in the parliament is not a mean task, considering the quality of the top leadership. That's all I will say. In the sense, the quality of their top leadership. Okay. And two, I think there is only a point up until which you can underestimate people. If somebody, let's say, has chosen to enter this particular arena, has weathered, let's say, all sorts of comments and stayed there, I will respect the person at least for that staying power. And that applies equally to Mr. Modi, considering the kind of attacks that he has suffered, weathered and stayed in all these years. Okay. So maybe you should take that with, let's say, you should learn to do that. Because, see, politics is such a game from whatever I understand. हर बार तो हवा आपके फेवर में तो बह नहीं सकता है. So you need to think about the alternatives, plan Bs. Because the one thing that the opposition has managed to demonstrate is that it can still cause chaos, notwithstanding the fact that it's not in the treasury benches. That is something that they have learned from the BJP. Because BJP has spent so long in the opposition in the parliament. And it was a militant, disciplined, cadre-based opposition. One of the finest oppositions in the history of oppositions of the world. There's no doubting it at all. After all, this is a party that has started from under the tree. बरगद के पेड़ के नीचे बैठ के मतलब ये आपके meetings होते थे. That's how this used to happen, right? So that discipline, I think, will hold this party in good stead if they continue to focus on that. Two,
none of the opposition parties are as cadre-based as the BJP. Yeah.
No way. There is a huge organizational support. There's a clear, let's say, identification of roles.
Which they did as an opposition party. They built a cadre, which is like harder to do.
Exactly. And with practically no resources, most of them are first generation or middle class politicians. They don't come from established legacy backgrounds, apart from, let's say, some founders of the Jansang. They've all come from the streets, the grassroots. So you need to go back to that in the long run, because right now you realize that it's the streets where the battles are being fought. When they realize that they can't, let's say, fight these battles in the parliament or in courts, they will get down to the streets. So you need to strengthen your position.
So 10 years in power makes that street fighting harder, which is what one saw in the 2024 elections, is that a number of their cadres, fattened is a wrong word, but it's a word which is used for being in power, which makes you lethargic.
So the thing is, it's human tendency to perhaps become slightly complacent and you take a few things for granted. Unfortunately, it so happens that somewhere the middle rung and may have communicated that one face will constantly work, whereas that one face was overworking. So there was no complacence from the top leadership in terms of putting the maximum possible effort. Second, maybe the messaging again could have been slightly different.
Yeah.
I say this as a lay observer from a distance.
Right.
With no first-hand wisdom or knowledge.
Yeah.
Three, in the parliament, when a young voice is speaking or a relatively young voice is speaking from the opposite side, I would want a similarly positioned voice from the treasury to respond, as opposed to getting the top person to respond all the time.
Yeah.
Strategically, it sends a different message. And two, the fact that you're not short of young options must be visible to the public. After all, you must take the credit for infusing the maximum number of first generation young politicians.
So one day when I was in the parliament and I was watching, and you had TMC Abhishek Banerjee speaking, and I saw this side and I was like, why is Brijesh Chauta not speaking? Why is Tejasvi not speaking?
Or Mr. Thakur.
Or Anurag Thakur. Anurag Thakur does get more opportunity than the others. Why are they not responding? And this was in the first couple of months. I think everybody was waiting for a signal for them to speak up. That's all I can think of. But get up and speak. Challenge.
From what I understand, this party and its ecosystem has a tradition of encouraging youngsters and pushing them up the ladder. That needs to be done in the parliament right now, because, see, जो हो सकता था वो हो चुका है. And उनके सारे जद्दोजहद के बावजूद, this is the maximum that they could have done. That's it. At least for now. Now you should really test out your next best 11, so to speak, in cricketing terms. And give them an opportunity to take, let's say, to attack the other side.
Yeah.
And bring the issues back to governance, civilization 100% equally. But make sure that your representation on each of these subjects is researched, I'm sure they do.
But the youngsters do. I mean, because
100% on technology and whatnot.
Yeah, they use technology.
I've seen that, right?
Yeah, they've done that.
So I hope that we start seeing a slightly different kind of demographic representation within the parliament from the treasury benches, so that the youth base that you've managed to tap into for the last 10 years continues to be on your side.
Okay. Omar Abdullah, what do you have to say? I mean, the BJP kept saying that these three families are not going to come back to Kashmir, but obviously Kashmir has decided that there is no option to the three families.
Correct. So when every time people said it's just a couple of families, they are the ones who are calling the shots, and the rest of the Aam Janta will bat for us, so on and so forth. I don't buy into that. I think the reality is clearer, simpler and starker than we wish to accept. And the fundamental problem there, and the way they treated the Kashmiri Pandits in Jammu recently when the shops were destroyed and whatnot, that streak has gone on. It has continued.
You don't think that Omar 2.0 is going to be any different from the earlier one?
No way. It can at best be a facade. I do not buy into anyone from that particular region who says that they have change of heart, because I'd like to see how they respond to Hindu concerns, Kashmiri Pandit concerns. Until I see a clear position coming from them with acknowledgement of the atrocities of the past, according to me, I will not buy it. Those people who go out as representatives or ambassadors of the valley on social media platforms, when you push them to the wall and ask them, what is your position on what happened to Kashmiri Pandits? And what do you think of the causes? They say, there was
They
a
should
recent
come
tweet.
back,
They said, no, not just they should come back. They actually gave a very different answer. You know, all that happened was primarily because Kashmiri Pandits were being typical Brahmins, and therefore their casteist pride was the reason for the revenge or the retribution that was taken by the plebs of that particular state. And that is the kind of theory that is being pushed on social media right now.
The Abdullahs haven't said that.
No, they may not have, but people who we thought were progressive voices from the valley have started saying it. So Abdullahs may not say it at this stage, but see, proof of the pudding is in the eating. Okay. Have you helped the condition of Kashmiri Pandits? Have you enabled their return? Have you initiated action against those who were responsible for it? Why does 1984 get a particular treatment and the genocide of Kashmiri Pandits get a different treatment when it comes to clear legal processes to prosecute the perpetrators? You do that, then we'll talk.
Okay. Next, Rahul Gandhi. How do you think that the 2024 general elections showed him up as a genuine leader of the Congress party now? He's leader of the opposition in parliament.
There is obviously a renewed sense of confidence, and I think he's been on the attack in the parliament. That clearly shows that the electoral results have boosted his confidence and the overall morale. And maybe it was his opportunity to respond to internal detractors within the party itself, within the Congress party. But outside of that, I don't wish to get into the party politics of it. My question is very simple. Are his positions good for Bharat or not? They are not. And if there is a clear external, let's say, motivation or goading of his positions, or let's say incentivization of his positions, then he may do well, he may do great, fantastic. I don't care.
What is external? You believe in the Soros narrative, that Soros is funding?
You must realize that cabal or the clique doesn't work through individuals alone. Faces are just the faces. There are a lot of people who stay behind the scenes.
Deep state.
100% yes. And I'm not making any aspersions or allegations here, but I can always say that there appears to be some convergence of interest between what the deep state wants for Bharat and what is echoed by their, let's say, sympathizers in Bharat. Now, whoever those sympathizers may be. And
why whoever? You know who, I mean, you have pointed them out in various columns.
I haven't named anyone. All I can say is that deep state is the outpost of colonization and imperialism, which believes in the supremacy of the Western civilization and which wants the rest of the world to act to the tunes of the West. And whether the deep state and its orientation will change after the transition or change of hands in January, I think, remains to be seen. because the deep state has managed to outlast every person at the top and has the ability to take them out one way or another. Okay, from Kennedy to Trump, we'll see what happens. So my suggestion is that in a game of shadows, if you think that a particular phase falls, it amounts to victory for you and a defeat for them, it doesn't work that way. They will have thought of replacements. Replacements for 30, 40, 50 years, because their vision extends beyond a decade, beyond 25 years, 30 years.
And if we or India wants to position itself as a Vishwaguru at some point of time, we need to have a vision of the same kind.
We need to have a vision and a deep state to enable that vision. China has one by now. It has managed to create one in the enemy territory, or that is the enemy of China, which is United States.
Well, some say that India does have it. I mean, if you were to look at, there was one video clip that I saw of a Netflix, no, I don't know whether it's a Netflix or what, in Canada, where the villains,
I saw that.
you saw that?
I saw that.
The villains are Indians who are going about killing people, and
I think there was a Khalistan reference there.
Khalistan reference
Yeah.
also, that the terrorist is supposedly, his mother was on Lockerbie crash.
That's the deep state trying to project that India has a deep
Deep
state. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know.
Okay.
All I can say is that if a deep state existed that wants to provide, or let's say protect Bharat's civilizational identity, then it would have found a preemptive response to Bangladesh and what is happening to Hindus in Bangladesh. And it would have, see, the thing is this, I don't want, there are two options that Bharat has. Get them all here. We lose that space forever. As a civilization, Hindu presence goes. What happens to Dhakeshwari Mandir? What happens to Hinglaj Mata? Every place which has the cultural and dharmic markers of Bharat Sanatani identity belongs to reclaimed Bharat, period. That is the vision that you need to pursue very clearly. And to pursue that vision, you will have to accordingly, plan your moves, your external moves and internal moves to enable that particular vision.
Yeah.
सीए से आप यहाँ पे सबको लेके आ सकते हैं, बट अगर आपने उसको पूरी तरह से हिंदू, मतलब ये खाली हो जाता है हिंदुओं से, then tomorrow they will say this never belonged to Hindus, just as they're talking about the existence of Pakistan 2000 years ago, as if Indus Valley civilization belongs to that ragtag state.
Okay. Udaynidhi's talent. What has happened post 2025 elections? He's like, he was all anti-Sanatan and anything. Suddenly he seems to have been quietened down.
He's bitten off more than he can chew.
Huh.
And I think
There's a lot of calmness now.
No, I think the father would have said, Konjam vai mudiko, which means
Keep your mouth shut.
Keep your mouth shut.
Okay.
That this is not a movie produced by your mama or your uncle or anybody else, by Sun Productions or Red Movies or whatever that is. This is real-time politics. We can perhaps buy a few theatres and make sure that a movie runs, but we can't do that all the time in politics.
Huh.
So know your place, remember your pay grade and stay in your shoes. May have been the message. Plus, I think he realized that his loose-tongued comment inspired reactions from across the country. And for the first time drew attention to Dravidinist poison also. Very clearly at a pan-India level, which I said on the last podcast.
In the last podcast, we
Right?
had an extensive discussion on that. Let me just bring in a little bit about Tamil Nadu politics. Talapati Vijay, how do you see his rise?
After Kamal Hassan's failure, he may have been somebody's plan B. Possible.
What is the huge crowd which came? It didn't come for Kamal Hassan.
It's let's say a spin-off of his popularity as an actor. That's there. But I think somebody wanted a youthful face with a mass base to counter Annamalai in the future. The people can say Annamalai just lost. What are you saying? Those who understand his value realize that he's a potential threat to entire Dravidinist ideology. For the first time, you have a politician taking on not just a party, but taking on an ideology which is the foundation of those parties. Two, maybe they banked on Kamal Hassan's potential success, but he's too much of a solo act for him to run a democratic party. So, and these are accusations from his own ex-office bearers.
It worked for Arvind Kejriwal. Why didn't it work for Kamal Hassan?
Because you see, Kamal Hassan was taking the persona of his superstar image to politics. Arvind Kejriwal has worked on the grassroots. He's been a part of the bureaucratic system. And he's been a smart cookie who's spearheaded a few campaigns for, let's say, RTI and so on and so forth. He understands that. And I think he's a smarter cookie and a smarter
Than
operator
Kamal
than
Hassan.
Kamal Hassan when it comes to politics.
How do you see Pawan Kalyan's rise?
Hopefully, I'm hopeful and optimistic about it. And someone who has managed to touch upon those issues which are the need of the hour in Andhra, especially coastal Andhra.
Is it all of Deccan?
All of Deccan would be too much of a statement to make at this
He's
point.
drawing as much crowd in Tamil Nadu as he's drawing in United Andhra.
I would want to see the reactions of the people of Tamil Nadu when he starts attacking Periyar. If he does.
If he does.
If he does.
Why? Why take on so many battles at the same time?
That's why I'm saying that he should not.
हाँ.
I'm saying अपने गढ़ में पहले अपने आप को आप स्थापित करो. Make sure that you have a clear position there and you address the problems of Andhra which are enough and more at this point. Conversion at a rampant scale, FCRA violations at a rampant scale, all sorts of land grabbing, all the things that Jagan has done in terms of building palaces and rather, let's say, palatial houses on sacred Hindu sites such as Rishikonda, which apparently is the place that is associated with Parashurama. He's literally balded that hill and he's built a house there, a palatial house.
There was this whole thing about Parashurama Kshetra, which they were going to do, unite all the Parashuram...
By Pawan Kalyan?
No, not Pawan Kalyan. By Hindus in Karnataka, in Kerala, in Andhra. Nothing seems to have happened to that. It just fell flat.
No, I think there are some organic efforts on the ground by people, but you see, as much as I value the contribution of an individual, sometimes you need a hub for the spokes to work in coordination.
Do you see anybody coming up in that?
Ma'am, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. To be honest, over the last 8 months, I've taken a backseat from all of this to focus on my practical commitments.
Exactly. This is what happens. Ultimately, हम सबका EMI होता है ना.
No, more than the EMI, the idea was, जो आपकी core competence है, उसमें अपने आप को पहले establish कर लीजिए, तब जाके आप बात कर पाएंगे. I didn't see the point in being public intellectual, social media, this person, that person. I have no such interest. I'm a lawyer, I'll die as one. I'm very clear about that. The idea was cement your position here. इससे आप जो कुछ भी contribute कर सकते हैं and doing justice and balancing your professional practice commitments and these commitments, I will do. That is the limited scope of my mandate, at least to myself.
Well, you have a huge fan following on social media.
ये सोशल मीडिया का हाइप चलते रहता है हर आई मीन एवरी दिवाली नाउ दे आर रनिंग दैट क्लिप ऑफ 2018 आई एम थिंकिंग प्लीज डोंट डू इट आई वाज फैटर अग्लियर डोंट डू इट गिव मी सम क्रेडिट आई हैव लॉस्ट सम वेट एटलीस्ट नया वीडियो तो डाल दो ये तो मतलब हर बार व्हाट्सएप पे आ रहा था यहाँ से कहीं से प्लीज बंद करो बहुत हो गया नॉट आई डोंट वांट इट
But I have seen people coming and thronging selfies. How does that work? Did you ever think, because you're a lawyer, right? For a lawyer to have this kind of a social media following where everybody comes and asks for selfies, especially youngsters, school going, college
it's
going.
a roller coaster and you need to decide whether that's what you want. Do you want visibility and relevance or do you want impact? I have taken a conscious call that I'm done with this cycle of constant promotion and being in the public eye constantly. I don't want it. I'm clear that I have certain professional advantages of practicing in fora where I can make a difference.
Yeah.
Through my limited contributions like the proverbial squirrel from Ramayana. And two, I don't want to be someone who holds forth on everything under the sun. As they say, you can't be, an expert on ethnology to gynecology. That doesn't work. Take a step back, focus on what you're good at. And I've decided to write more as opposed to speak more on these platforms. Litfest cycle का मैंने actually खत्म ही कर दिया था almost. For the first time after several months, I've gone to Pragjotishpur Litfest only because it gives me access to the Northeast. Otherwise, I said until my third book is out, I will not do this. You can't keep selling the books that you published in 21 and 22. It's time for the next book.
Can we know what you're working on?
So ma'am, it's tetralogy. So it's a 4-part series. So the two parts are out. Okay. Yeah, it was meant to be 1, then it became 3 and then 4, but it'll end at 4. The third part of the book, the series, will basically cover the period from 1924 to 35.
Okay.
So Khilafat was where the second book ended. It'll take the conversation from there to the proto-constitution, namely the Government of India Act of 1935, the constitution before the 1950 constitution. But I will go back to 1763 and start from Sannyasi rebellion and how the Hindu consciousness has changed over, let's say, over the decades, and how it has now acquired a default mode of compromise.
Okay.
From its ability to say, ये जगह मेरी है, ये मंदिर मेरा है, मैं इसके लिए लड़ने के लिए तैयार हूँ, to ये भी छोड़ देते हैं, वो भी छोड़ देते हैं, ये अफेक्ट होगा, वो अफेक्ट होगा. What we are seeing right now in the context of POW Act, ये दिमाग, ये जो विकृति जो आया है, ये कहाँ से आया है? So I'll be covering multiple movements
Which subsumed the Shakta spirit.
Totally.
Which
The Kshatriya spirit and of course the Shakti practice of basically saying kuch bhi ho, mund mala to chadega agar tum mandir ko attack karoge to. Very clear. So we are going through a phase of rediscovery. Whether this reinforces the existing position of compromise or brings back the Kshatriya spirit is the question. And therefore I'm tracing from 1763, I'll bring the topic to 1924, merge all the three books, and the conversation will go from there on. The final book will cover the conversation from 1935 to 1950.
So we look forward to having you
Thank
first here on the podcast when your
September
book comes out.
2025.
Ayo, that is too long. Before that, we should have you here on the workings of the book.
Okay.
For those who don't know, what does senior advocate mean? What does junior advocate mean? Can you please explain? What does this mean? You get more money, of course.
Yes. So Advocates Act recognizes two categories of people, advocate and senior advocate. So once you enter the profession, there are multiple streams. But should you choose litigation as let's say your career path, then in litigation, either you could be the guy who handholds the client and advises them. And that person broadly is called the solicitor because he is actually dealing with the client. He is the one who drafts, advises, puts together the brief and all that. So he gets the power of attorney or the wakalatnama from the client. In some courts, by and large, what you can do is the solicitor himself can argue in court and let's say present the case of the client directly to the court. There's another species of advocates who are called arguing counsels or simply counsels. People who choose to practice in the mold of barristers, where their only job is to argue. So the barrister's client is the solicitor. The solicitor's client is the actual client.
So now you are?
So I used to practice in the mold of an arguing counsel for the last 8 years. I've completed 15 years of practice. So the first 7 years was spent in a law firm, where I rose to the level of an associate partner, then quit to go independent to practice exclusively as an arguing counsel, which is what I did for the last 8 years. And I applied for senior designation in the Delhi High Court this year in April. The notification came out in March. I was designated as senior advocate on the 29th of November 2024. So this basically means that the protocol that I followed for the last 8 years informally will apply even more strictly formally. No direct interaction with the clients. You go through only the solicitor.
Why?
Because it's like this. It's like division of turf. The solicitor handles the client and you basically are the face before the court. And the idea is you should not interact with the client behind the solicitor's back. That's the duty of candor between the two of you. You respect his territory and he respects your territory. So the solicitor is your assisting counsel or the briefing counsel or the instructing counsel in court. You get to lead the matter. And usually, traditionally speaking, senior advocates have the first right of audience. But I think that's an outdated concept. What you get, of course, is you are expected to be slightly more detached from the case. Because a solicitor's job is to represent the client. The onus is greater on you to be honest to the court. You will not misrepresent. There are serious implications if you misrepresent. And you will state the right position of the law because you have acquired a certain position as a senior advocate. And therefore, this practice model is contingent on the word of mouth goodwill that exists among your peers who say, isko leke jao, he does the job well in terms of arguments. So that is the basic role or the practice model of a senior advocate.
How fair is the system? Because about the judiciary, it's been said nepotism hota hai. If you're somebody's son, grandson, daughter, that's how you get picked to be senior. That's how you get your cases. That's how the path to judiciary is. How fair is this system?
Smita ji, I'll tell you one thing. Nepotism is a reality of life. And it's a global reality. It just goes by the name of lobbying, connections, network or whatever it is in some other places. And here it has acquired the name of jugaad or nepotism. I don't think the existence of nepotism can be done away with. The question that we should be asking ourselves is, in addition to people who are second generation or third generation lawyers, do you also have enough room for first generation people to enter that particular space and establish themselves? And I don't think it is the fault of people who are second or third generation lawyers to be born into that particular lineage and to also opt for it. Okay, assume for a moment my child decides to take up the practice and he chooses to take up the same or she chooses to take up the same profession. Is it that child's fault? So they will inherit a certain infrastructure, an existing set of clients, an existing set of briefs, so on and so forth, assuming that they're good. But take it from me, the profession is ruthless in the sense You can perhaps get by with a certain name only for a certain period of time. At the end of the day, market forces will prevail. If you're good at your job, you will certainly make the cut by and large. Uske baad to takdeer ki baat hai. That's a different issue altogether. But allow me to say this as a proud product of the Delhi High Court, not because the High Court has designated me, I'm saying this. I had the confidence to apply because it is perhaps a shining beacon for first generation lawyers to practice and also to make a name for themselves. The tradition of the Delhi High Court is to respect people whether or not they have the gown, which is namely whether they're a senior advocate or not, as long as you come prepared with the brief. I come from practically nothing in terms of this background. I come from a lower middle class family with a family which has got absolutely no connection with the profession whatsoever. And this bar, frankly speaking, is according to me, among the best in the world today for its contribution to leading subjects and also its treatment of young counsels, the expedition with which matters are taken up. A lot of people have shifted their registered offices to Delhi in the hope that they'll be able to access the jurisdiction of the Delhi High Court because today this is one of the finest commercial courts. So, according to me, going by my experience of the Delhi High Court, if this model were to be replicated across the country, then I think it's a great model. But of course, being in Delhi, it has its own advantages. Delhi sabka hai aur kisi ka nahi hai. It's a cosmopolitan place, right? Because you can't say there is just one particular regional flavor here. Of course, there are, let's say, factions or lobbies across the board, but it's a plurality of it. It's not one particular lobby that heavily weighs over the other. And I say this as someone, as a rank southerner, likha hua hai, and the Delhi High Court has embraced us. So, I don't want to use the word nepotism. Let's call it hereditary practice structures. They exist. I don't deny that. But there is at least 40 to 50% space for first generation lawyers. And if somebody were to believe that any journey is a solo act, even if you happen to be a practicing barrister or a senior advocate, it is never a solo act. Across the way, along the way, you've been the recipient of kindness and opportunities from people who've just said, ये अच्छा करता है, ये अच्छा करती है, इसको opportunity दे दो, देखते हैं क्या होता है. Clients put faith in you. That's how this has happened. Okay. So I'm very clear that the Delhi High Court is perhaps among the best places for a young lawyer to practice it.
That's heartening to know. What do you have to say to the secular civil code which is coming about, which was another name for the uniform civil code?
No, I think it's important to perhaps put some thought into the optics of the naming of it, which I agree with. But I certainly want to understand the end vision and the end goal. At least in terms of how does it look and how does it smell, touch and taste and all that. See, the point is, I'm sure, the powers that be and the people who are working on this or who perhaps are assumed to be working on this know what needs to be done. We need greater research material to come out with some semblance of clarity and the ability to convey and message. I'll just connect it to the first part of a conversation. Solicitors prepare the brief. The arguing counsel delivers the brief. Similarly, bureaucrats and others will put their heads together and come out with a document. But how is the document supposed to be messaged, conveyed and articulated at different levels to different audiences? That's a different game altogether. This is perhaps one of those times where I think people will sorely miss the presence of Arun Jaitley and Sushma Swaraj.
I think triple talaq was presented well, the law. The 370 abrogation was presented well.
I agree.
On this, the work seems to have started already.
No, I think we may be even unfair here. I'll tell you why. Because Uniform Civil Code is way more complex than CAA or 370. It's way more complex, and I don't want to even undermine the seriousness of it. It's complex. It's a maze of personal laws, and it's not as if there is uniformity even in minority groups with respect to the practices, because from region to region it varies.
It varies, yes.
Right? You have to be very clear about that.
Correct.
How much are we going to interfere? How are we going to do this? You'll need a baseline study, a law commission report and whatnot.
Yeah.
Okay? See, the point is, according to me, now that you know, thanks to the last 11 years, what kind of challenges can be faced on the street, in courts and otherwise.
Yeah, and on NRC and all we saw that. Yeah.
So, are you going to learn the lessons of these, let's say, episodes and apply it to this, according to me, the mega project? And what is the extent to which you're willing to engage with an external audience, like, let's say, Qatar,
Yeah.
when they chose to crack the whip, or anybody else within who's willing to collaborate with Qatar, right? So you will have to find a way to message that, which is why I think this will call for multiple levels of preparation. I'm not trying to hold forth as someone who knows what needs to be done. I'm just saying these are tentative ideas.
Complicated also, yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming on
Thanks,
the
ma'am.
podcast, and all the best to you.
Thank you. Jai Shri Ram.
Thanks. Thank you for watching or listening to this edition of the ANI podcast with Smita Prakash. Do like or subscribe on whichever channel you have seen this or heard this. Namaste. Jai Hind. Click here to watch the previous episodes.